The shuttle's descent through Tenebris VI's atmosphere was a descent into a grave. Father Corvus gripped the iron aquila around his neck, its edges biting into his calloused palm as the craft shuddered, buffeted by winds thick with toxic spores. The viewport revealed nothing but a churning gray haze, the planet's fungal forests hidden beneath a perpetual twilight that seemed to swallow light itself. The ecclesiarchy had sent him alone, a solitary priest tasked with reconsecrating a forgotten shrine lost to Imperial records centuries ago. The mission was penance, they said, for his outspoken sermons questioning the Ministorum's tithes on his homeworld. Corvus knew better. This was exile, dressed in the trappings of duty. The shuttle lurched, landing gears grinding against the squelching earth. The pilot, a servitor, with half its face replaced by rusted augmetics, hissed a binary confirmation of touchdown before falling silent. Corvus donned his rebreather, its filters hissing as they strained against the planet's poisoned air. His robes, heavy with embroidered litanies, dragged in the muck as he stepped onto Tenebris VI. The silence was immediate, oppressive, broken only by the distant creak of fungal caps swaying hundreds of meters above. The shrine, marked on his crumbling data slate, lay a kilometer east, its coordinates etched into a map barely legible from age. He trudged through the mire, the ground writhing with parasitic worms that recoiled from his boots. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a cloying sweetness that clung to his throat despite the rebreather. Memories of his childhood in the hive slums of Varnus IV surfaced unbidden, screams of the faithful, as enforcers purged a heretical cult, his mother's hands shielding his eyes from the pyres. Corvus shook his head, muttering a prayer to banish the past. "Emperor, guide my steps," he whispered, his voice muffled by the mask. The shrine emerged from the mist, a crumbling edifice of black stone half consumed by fungal tendrils. Its spire, once crowned with a golden aquila, was broken, the icon lost to the mire. The entrance gaped like a wound, its interior shrouded in darkness. Corvus's torch flickered, casting jagged shadows that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking. He stepped inside, his boots echoing on the cracked marble floor. The altar at the chamber's heart was intact, but its surface was slick with black ichor that glistened in the torchlight. He knelt, placing his aquila on the altar, and began the rite of consecration, his voice steady despite the weight in his chest. Then he heard it, a faint hymn drifting from the shadows. It was soft, almost imperceptible, a chorus of voices singing in high Gothic. The melody was familiar, a litany of devotion he'd sung as a boy in the Scola's choir before the ecclesiarchy claimed him. His heart quickened, the memory of those days flooding back. The cold stone of the Scola's chapel, the warmth of his mentor's hand on his shoulder. But the hymn was wrong. The words were twisted, their cadence uneven, as if sung by throats unused to human speech. Corvus froze, his prayer faltering. The voices grew louder, circling him, though the chamber remained empty. He rose, clutching his staff, its crozius head glowing faintly with sanctified energy. "Who sings in this forsaken place?" he demanded, his voice echoing into the void. No answer came, but the hymn swelled, now carrying a promise of salvation, of rest. Corvus's torch flickered again, and for a moment he thought he saw figures in the darkness, cloaked shapes with no faces, their hands outstretched. He blinked, and they were gone. But the hymn remained, burrowing into his mind like a splinter. His data slate chimed, its screen flickering with static. The coordinates had shifted, pointing deeper into the shrine's labyrinthine depths. Corvus's rebreather hissed, its filters clogging with spores that seemed to pulse with faint bioluminescence. He glanced at the altar, where his aquila now rested in a pool of ichor, its edges corroded, The hymn called to him, urging him forward, promising answers to questions he hadn't dared ask since Varnus IV. Why had the Emperor abandoned the faithful? Why had his mentor burned for speaking truth? Corvus took a step toward the darkness, the hymn wrapping around his soul like a chain. Something ancient waited within, something that knew his doubts, his fears. He tightened his grip on his staff, whispering a final prayer as the shadows closed in. The shrine's corridors twisted deeper into Tenebris VI's heart, each step pulling Father Corvus further from the world he knew. The hymn followed him, its melody weaving through the damp air, no longer distant but intimate, as if sung just beyond his shoulder. His torch cast feeble light on walls of pitted stone, their surfaces etched with faded Imperial iconography. Aquilas defaced by time, their wings chipped into ruin. The rebreather's hiss was his only companion, its filters straining against spores that glowed faintly in the dark, drifting like embers. Corvus's staff tapped the floor, the Crozius's faint hum, a fragile anchor against the hymn's pull. He whispered litanies to steady his mind, but the words felt hollow, drowned by the choir's relentless song. The hymn was clearer now, its high Gothic lyrics forming prayers he hadn't heard since his Schola days on Varnus IV. Blessed is the soul that kneels before the throne, it sang, but the voices carried a hunger, a need that made his skin prickle. He remembered his mentor, Sister Elise, her voice guiding his own in those same prayers, her eyes alight with faith. She'd been the one to see his potential, to lift him from the hive's underbelly to the ecclesiarchy's ranks, and she'd been the one to burn, branded a heretic for questioning the tithes that starved their flock. Corvus had stood silent at her execution, his faith unshaken but his heart cracked. The hymn seemed to know this, its melody twisting around that memory, pulling it raw and bleeding to the surface. He reached a chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow, dominated by a ring of statues, saints of the Imperium, their faces worn to featureless masks. The hymn swelled here, vibrating in his chest, and the statues glistened with black ichor that wept from their stone eyes. Corvus approached one, Saint Mara of the Cleansing Flame, her torch raised in defiance. The ichor pooled at her base, its surface rippling as if stirred by an unseen breath. He touched it, and his glove came away slick, the substance cold yet pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat. His torch flickered, and the hymn shifted, now singing of martyrdom, of sacrifice for a god who demanded all. Was Elise's death your will, Emperor? He murmured, his voice trembling. The hymn answered with a surge, its voices pleading for him to join them, to sing eternal. His data slate flickered, its screen cracked, but still displaying shifting coordinates, urging him deeper. He noticed carvings on the walls, half hidden by fungal growths, angular glyphs that didn't match Imperial script. They reminded him of reports he'd read in the ecclesiarchy's archives, warnings of Necron tomb worlds, their symbols etched in metal that devoured light. His heart thudded, the rebreather's hiss faltering as spores clogged its vents. The glyphs seemed to shift when he looked away, forming patterns that tugged at his mind, whispering of ancient things that slumbered beneath the planet's crust. Corvus clutched his aquila, its corroded edges biting into his palm, and forced himself to move on, the hymn growing louder, more insistent. The corridor narrowed, its walls closing in until his robes brushed against them, leaving trails of ichor. Memories of Varnus IV flooded him. Elise's screams as the pyre consumed her, the crowd's chants drowning out her pleas. He'd believed her death just a necessary purge of doubt, but now the hymn made him question. Had the Emperor truly sanctioned her fate, or had the ecclesiarchy betrayed its own? The voices sang of forgiveness, of a choir where all were equal, and Corvus felt a treacherous longing to believe them. His torch dimmed, and in the half-light he saw shapes again, cloaked figures at the corridor's edge, their forms wavering like heat haze. They had no faces, only voids where eyes should be, yet they beckoned, their hands skeletal beneath tattered robes. He raised his staff, its crozius flaring, and the figures dissolved. But the hymn grew sharper, cutting into his thoughts. "You cannot hide from us," it seemed to say, though the words were unspoken. Corvus's knees buckled, and he leaned against the wall, his breath ragged. The ichor seeped through his glove, cold and alive, and he felt a presence. Not the Emperor's light, but something older, colder, watching from the dark. His data slate chimed, its coordinates now pointing to a chamber ahead, where the hymn's source pulsed like a wound in reality. He staggered forward, driven by duty or madness, unsure which. The statue's ichor had stained his robes, and he wondered if Elise's blood had stained the pyre the same way. The air in the shrine grew heavier, as if Tenebris VI itself exhaled a miasma of despair. Father Corvus staggered into a vast chamber, its walls curving upward into a dome lost in shadow. The hymn was no longer a sound, but a force, thrumming in his bones, each note a hook sinking deeper into his soul. His torch sputtered, its light swallowed by the darkness, revealing only glimpses of the chamber's floor. Mosaic tiles depicting Imperial saints, their faces defaced, replaced by angular glyphs that pulsed with faint green light. The rebreather wheezed, its filters choking on spores that now shimmered like stars in the gloom. Corvus's staff trembled in his grip, the crozius's glow flickering, as if reluctant to challenge the shrine's malevolence. The hymn's voices were legion now, a chorus of thousands, their high Gothic lyrics weaving promises of unity, of absolution. "Join us," they sang, "and know peace beyond the Emperor's gaze." Corvus's heart ached at the words, stirring memories of Sister Elise's final sermon, her voice defiant even as the flames rose. She'd spoken of a faith untainted by dogma, a truth the ecclesiarchy had branded heresy. He'd buried that memory, but the hymn dragged it forth, raw and bleeding, forcing him to relive the moment he'd turned away from her pyre. His knees buckled, and he clutched his aquila, its corroded surface slick with ichor that burned his skin through his gloves. In the chamber's center stood a crystalline pillar, its surface etched with the same Necron-like glyphs he'd seen before. It pulsed in time with the hymn, emitting a sickly light that cast no shadows. Corvus approached, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't name. The pillar's surface was smooth, almost liquid, and when he touched it, a jolt surged through him, filling his mind with images. Hundreds of souls, their faces contorted in ecstasy and agony, singing as one. They were the lost colony of Tenebris VI, he realized, their essences trapped within the pillar, bound by a Xenos device older than the Imperium. The hymn was their prison, their plea, their trap. Figures materialized around him, cloaked in tattered Imperial robes, their forms wavering like smoke. They had no faces, only voids that seemed to drink the light. Yet their voices joined the hymn, beckoning him closer. "You are one of us," they whispered, their words slithering into his thoughts. Corvus recoiled, raising his staff, but the crozius's light dimmed, its sanctified power faltering. The figures pressed closer, their skeletal hands brushing his robes, leaving trails of ichor that seeped into the fabric, cold and alive. He swung his staff, and it passed through them, their forms dissolving only to reform, their hymn unbroken. Memories flooded him, Elise's execution, but now he saw himself in the crowd, chanting for her death, his voice indistinguishable from the mob's. The vision shifted, showing him as a boy, hiding in Varnus IV's underhive. His mother's corpse cooling beside him, her blood pooling like the ichor at his feet. "Lies," he roared, but the hymn drowned his voice, its melody twisting his doubts into certainties. Had he betrayed Elise? Had he abandoned his mother? The figures circled tighter, their voids staring into him, peeling away layers of faith until only guilt remained. His data slate fell from his belt, its screen shattered but still glowing, displaying coordinates that now pointed nowhere, as if the shrine itself mocked his mission. The pillar's light intensified, and Corvus felt his mind fraying, his thoughts blending with the choir's. He saw Elise among the figures, her face a void, her voice singing of forgiveness he didn't deserve. His rebreather failed, spores flooding his lungs, and he coughed, tasting blood and something metallic, alien. His body weakened, his knees sinking into the ichor-slick floor, and he realized the pillar was feeding on him, drawing his soul into its endless song. Yet a spark of defiance flickered. He clutched his Aquila, its pain grounding him, and whispered a prayer, not to the Emperor, but to Elise, begging her strength. The hymn faltered, just for a moment, and the figures hesitated, their voids flickering with something like fear. Corvus staggered to his feet, his staff raised, determined to fight the choir's embrace, even as the pillar's light burned brighter, promising an eternity of song. The crystalline pillar's light burned into Father Corvus's eyes, its sickly green glow searing through his faltering resolve. The hymn was a tidal wave now, crashing against his mind, each note a plea to surrender, to join the endless choir trapped within the Xenos device. The chamber's air was thick with spores, shimmering like dying stars, clogging his ruined rebreather until every breath was a struggle. His robes, soaked with black ichor, clung to his skin, the cold substance pulsing as if alive, burrowing into his flesh. The faceless figures encircled him, their void-like faces radiating hunger, their skeletal hands reaching, brushing his arms with a touch that burned like frostbite. The hymn sang of peace, of unity, but Corvus felt only the weight of his sins, each one a chain dragging him toward the pillar. He staggered back, his staff's crozius barely flickering, its sanctified light a dying ember against the shrine's malevolence. The visions came faster now. Sister Elise's pyre, her screams blending with the hymn, her eyes accusing him from the flames. He saw himself on Varnus IV, a boy cowering in the underhive, abandoning his mother to the gangs that tore her apart. The choir knew his guilt, its voices weaving it into their song, promising absolution if he surrendered. "You are already ours," they whispered. And Corvus felt his thoughts fraying, his identity slipping into the pillar's endless chorus. His body weakened, his knees buckling, and he tasted blood and metal in his mouth, spores rewriting his lungs with every gasp. The pillar pulsed faster, its Necron glyphs writhing like serpents, and Corvus saw the truth in its light. The lost colony of Tenebris VI, thousands of souls consumed by this ancient trap, their faith twisted into a lure for others. The device was no mere relic. It was a harvester, a Xenos machine designed to feed on devotion, turning worship into imprisonment. The figures closed in, their voids now flickering with faces, Elise, his mother, the faithful he'd failed, and their hymn became a command. Sing with us, or be nothing. Corvus's Aquila, clutched in his trembling hand, burned against his palm, its corrosion complete. Yet its pain was a lifeline, a reminder of the Emperor's judgment. He forced himself to stand, his vision blurring as the ichor seeped deeper, black veins spreading beneath his skin. Memories of Elise's defiance surged, her final sermon, calling for a faith that served the people, not the ecclesiarchy's greed. She died for that truth, and Corvus had let her burn. now. The choir offered him her forgiveness, but at the cost of his soul. He raised his staff, its crozius flaring one last time, and struck the pillar. The impact sent a shockwave through the chamber, the hymn faltering, the figures recoiling as cracks spread across the crystal's surface. "I am not yours," he roared, his voice raw, blood flecking his lips. The pillar's light flared, and the choir's song turned to a scream, a cacophony of rage and desperation. The figures lunged, their hands sinking into his flesh, not tearing but merging, their ichor bonding with his blood. Corvus felt his body dissolving, his bones softening, his thoughts bleeding into the choir's collective mind. He saw the colony's final days, priests leading their flock into the shrine, believing it a sanctuary, only to be consumed by the pillar's hunger. Their faith had been their doom, and now it was his. Yet Elise's memory burned brighter, her voice cutting through the hymn, urging him to fight. With a final surge of will, Corvus drove his staff into the pillar's core, the crozius shattering as it pierced the crystal. The chamber shook, tiles cracking, the glyphs dimming, but the hymn grew louder, defiant. The figures enveloped him, their voids swallowing his vision, and he felt his soul tearing free, drawn toward the pillar's maw. His last thought was of Elise, her hand on his shoulder in the scola, her voice promising he could be more than his failures. The hymn claimed him, but not wholly. Something within him resisted, a spark of defiance that refused to sing. The shrine trembled as Father Corvus's soul teetered on the edge of oblivion. The crystalline pillar's light now a blinding vortex of green and black, its necron glyphs writhing like living things. The hymn was no longer a song, but a scream, a cacophony of thousands of voices, human, alien, and something far older, tearing at his mind, demanding he become one with them. His body was failing, black ichor coursing through his veins, his flesh softening as if melting into the pillar's embrace. The faceless figures were no longer separate. They merged with the air, their void-like faces swirling around him. A storm of hunger that wore the visages of Elise, his mother, and every soul he'd failed. His broken staff lay at his feet, the crozius shattered, its sanctified light extinguished. Yet the pain of his corroded aquila, fused to his palm, anchored him, a final tether to his humanity. The chamber's mosaic floor cracked, tiles depicting defaced saints crumbling into dust, revealing more glyphs beneath, angular, light-devouring, pulsing in rhythm with the pillar. Corvus's lungs burned, spores flooding his ruined rebreather, each breath a metallic agony that tasted of blood and Xeno's corruption. He saw the colony's fate clearly now. Priests and pilgrims, lured by faith, had fed this machine, their devotion twisted into a trap that spanned millennia. The pillar was a relic of the Necrons, or perhaps something older, a device that harvested burying souls like a Cetan shard, harvesting consciousness. It didn't just kill, it consumed minds, preserving them in an eternal choir to fuel its alien purpose. Corvus's mind was unraveling, his memories of Varnus IV, Elise's pyre, his mother's death, blending with the colony's, their collective guilt amplifying his own. "You cannot escape," the hymn roared, and he felt his identity dissolving, his thoughts joining the chorus. But Elise's defiance burned within him, her voice from that final sermon cutting through the chaos. Faith is not obedience, it is courage. He clung to her words, to the spark of resistance that had flickered when he struck the pillar. He had to end this, not for himself, but for the Imperium, to warn them of Tenebris VI's curse. With trembling hands, he tore the Vox unit from his belt, its casing cracked but functional. He activated it, his voice hoarse as he recorded a warning. "This is Father Corvus, Ecclesiarchy. Tenebris VI is a trap, a Xenos device. It feeds on faith, consumes souls. The hymn surged, drowning his words, and the figures solidified, their hands sinking into his chest, pulling at his soul. Corvus staggered toward the pillar, the ichor now a part of him, his body half dissolved, his vision a kaleidoscope of faces, Elise's most vivid, her eyes not accusing but urging. He reached into his robes, pulling a crack grenade, its weight a final act of will. "For the Emperor," he gasped, arming the device and hurling it at the pillar's core. The explosion was deafening, the chamber collapsing as the pillar shattered, its light imploding, the hymn fracturing into a wail of countless voices. The figures screamed, their forms disintegrating, but Corvus felt his soul wrench free, drawn into the dying machine. He was singing now, not by choice, his voice joining the eternal resonance, trapped in the choir's endless song. The Vox unit, half buried in rubble, transmitted his final words, cut off mid-sentence. "Destroy this world. Before it..." Static swallowed the rest, broadcasting to an Imperium that might never hear. The shrine's ruins settled, the fungal forests reclaiming the stone. But the pillar's fragments pulsed faintly, its hunger dormant, not destroyed, waiting for the next soul to sing. The void spat Captain Alaravarn's ship from the warp like a broken bone, its hull screaming as it crashed through Tenebris VI's fungal canopy. The stellar wraith, a rogue trader vessel clad in gilded excess, lay gutted in the mire, its plasma drives silent, its crew scattered or dead. Alara stumbled from the wreckage, her void suit torn, its seals hissing against the planet's toxic air. Her augmetic eye flickered, scanning the perpetual twilight of fungal forests, their caps looming like cathedral domes. The air was thick with spores, glowing faintly, clinging to her like a second skin. She was alone. Her dynasty's last scion, stranded on a death world that reeked of decay and secrets. The weight of her family's betrayal, siblings who'd sold her to the Inquisition for a scrap of power, pressed heavier than the planet's oppressive silence. Her Vox crackled, spitting static and fragments of her crew's screams cut off mid-plea. Alara's hand tightened on her last pistol, its ornate grip etched with the Varn crest, a relic of a dynasty now crumbling. She'd been chasing a rumor, a Xenos artifact in the Ghoul Stars said to grant dominion over fate itself. The warp had betrayed her, as her family had, dumping her here. Her data slate, cracked but functional, pinged with coordinates leading to a structure half buried in the fungal mire. A ruin of black metal, its angles wrong, absorbing light like a wound in reality. She moved toward it, driven by desperation and the Varn's stubbornness that had outlasted her kin. The ruin's entrance gaped, its surface etched with glyphs that flickered between Necron angularity and Eldar curves. Alara's augmetic eye whirred, recording the symbols, their patterns tugging at her mind, whispering of power and ruin. Inside, the air was colder, the spores thicker, and a faint hum vibrated through her boots. She found a chamber dominated by a crystalline shard suspended above a dais, pulsing with a soft, violet light. It was beautiful, alien and wrong, its surface shifting like liquid starlight. The hum became a whisper, not in her ears but her thoughts, speaking in her sister's voice, Lycia, who'd betrayed her to the Ordo Xenos. "You were always too weak," it hissed, and Alara's heart clenched, memories of Lycia's smug smile flooding back. She approached the shard, last pistol raised, but her hand trembled. The whispers grew, now a chorus. Her brother Torin, her mother, all the Varns who'd schemed and died for their ambition. They accused her of failure, of losing the dynasty's glory. The shard's light intensified, and visions flickered in her mind. Her siblings' deaths, orchestrated by her own deals to secure the stellar wraith. She'd thought herself free of guilt, but the whispers peeled it raw, exposing the blood on her hands. Her augmetic eye sparked, projecting static images of her crew, their faces contorted, screaming her name as they vanished into the ruin's depths. Alara's vox crackled again, broadcasting her own voice, distorted, begging for mercy. She silenced it, but the whispers persisted, promising power to rebuild her dynasty, to erase her betrayals. The shard pulsed in time with her heartbeat, and she felt a pull, as if it knew her greed, her shame, her rage. Her mother's voice echoed loudest, reciting a warning from Alara's childhood. Xenos relics lie, child. They feed on what you love. She ignored it, stepping closer, the shard's light bathing her in warmth she hadn't felt since before the Varn name became a curse. Something moved in the shadows, a shimmer like liquid metal, and the whispers turned hungry, calling her to touch the shard, to claim its promise. The ruin's chamber pulsed with the crystalline shard's violet light, its glow casting Captain Alara Varn's shadow across walls etched with Necron Eldar hybrid glyphs. The whispers had become a storm in her mind, no longer just her family's voices, but a cacophony of screams, her crew, her kin, and something ancient, inhuman, that spoke of hunger without end. Her augmetic eye sparked, its lenses struggling to focus as the shard's light warped her vision, projecting fractured images of her past. Alara's last pistol hung heavy in her hand, its barrel wavering as she fought the urge to touch the shard, its surface rippling like a star-filled void. The air was thick with spores, their bioluminescence swirling around her, seeping through her void suit's tears and stinging her skin with a cold, metallic bite. The whispers sharpened, her sister Lycia's voice cutting through. You let me die, Alara. You sold me for your ship. The accusation stabbed deep, dragging up the memory of Lycia's arrest, Alara's deal with an Inquisitor, trading her sister's freedom for the Stellar Wraith's charter. She told herself it was necessary, that Lycia's scheming would have ruined the dynasty. But the shard's light showed her the truth. Lycia's terrified eyes as the black ship took her, Alara turning away, her ambition colder than the void. The vision shifted, her brother Torin, bleeding out in a hive spire, his death orchestrated by Alara's contacts to secure her claim. You're no Varn, he spat, his voice echoing in the whispers. Her mother's warning followed, soft but piercing. Xenos relics feed on what you love. Alara stumbled, her boots slipping on the chamber's ichor-slick floor. Her vox crackled, broadcasting her crew's final moments. Navigator Prin's plea, Captain, it's in the walls, before a gurgling scream. She tore the vox from her belt, smashing it against the dais. But the whispers grew louder, now in her own voice, confessing her betrayals. The shard pulsed faster, and she saw her crew's fates. Prin, her navigator, dissolved into a shimmering void. Her armsman Kale, his face frozen in agony, consumed by liquid metal. They'd followed her to Tenebris VI, chasing her dream of power, and now they were gone, their screams blending with the shard's song. She forced herself to the chamber's edge, tracing the glyphs with trembling fingers. They were unlike any Necron sigils she'd seen in her rogue trader logs, sharper, interwoven with Eldar runes, suggesting a hybrid technology, prison or a weapon from the war in heaven. Her augmetic eye whirred, analyzing the patterns, and a realization hit. The shard was a fragment, a Citan shard, its hunger not for flesh, but for consciousness, memories, the essence of self. It fed on her guilt, her ambition, growing stronger with each betrayal she relived. The whispers laughed, her mother's voice twisting. You love only yourself, Alara. Feed me that. Something moved in the shadows, a liquid shimmer like the metal that had claimed her crew. It flowed across the walls, forming faces, Prin, Kale, Lycia. each dissolving into a void that stared back. Alara fired her last pistol, the bolt sizzling harmlessly into the dais, and the shard's light flared, pulling her closer. Her augmetic eye burned, projecting her childhood. Hiding in the Stellar Wraith's hold, overhearing her mother barter with Elder Corsairs, trading Xeno's relics for survival. They lie, her mother had said, but Alara had ignored her, chasing relics to restore the Varn name. Now, the shard knew her every choice, its whispers weaving them into a tapestry of failure. Her hand hovered over the shard, drawn by its promise to erase her past, to make her a god among the stars. But her mother's warning echoed, and she pulled back, her heart pounding. The shimmer in the shadows grew, forming a humanoid shape, its surface rippling with her crew's faces, their mouths open in silent screams. The whispers turned ravenous, urging her to embrace the shard, to surrender her mind. Alara's knees buckled, her void suit seals failing, spores flooding her lungs. She tasted blood and starlight, her thoughts fracturing. But she clung to one truth. She was a Varn, and Varns fought, even when they fell. The chamber's violet light pulsed like a dying star, the crystalline shard's glow searing through Captain Alara Varn's fracturing mind. The whispers were no longer voices, but a torrent, a psychic flood that drowned her thoughts in a sea of guilt, rage, and alien hunger. Her augmetic eye burned, its lenses cracked, projecting visions that bled into reality. Her sister Lycia's face, twisted in betrayal, merging with the liquid metal shimmer that stalked the shadows. The Citan shard's presence was undeniable now, its consciousness a vast cold void that fed on her memories, her essence, pulling her into an abyss where self and others ceased to exist. Her void suit was in tatters, spores flooding her lungs, each breath a metallic sting that crystallized her blood, her body betraying her as surely as her family had. The shard's whispers wove her past into a noose. She saw Lycia's arrest again, but now Alara was the Inquisitor, pronouncing her sister's doom, her own voice cold as the black ship's hull. The vision shifted, her brother Torin, his throat slit by her own hand, not her contacts, his blood pooling like the ichor on the chamber's floor. Her mother's warning echoed, distorted. Xeno's relics feed on what you love. Now it was Alara's voice, mocking her own folly. The shard knew her every sin, every deal, every betrayal, and it delighted in them. Its hunger growing with each memory it consumed. Her augmetic eyes sparked, showing her crew's final moments. Navigator Prin, her flesh dissolving into starlight. Armsman Kale, his screams silenced as liquid metal consumed his skull. Their faces formed in the shard's surface, accusing, pleading, then dissolving into the void. Alara staggered, her less pistol clattering to the floor, useless against the entity that hunted her mind. The chamber's walls seemed to breathe, the Necron Eldar glyphs writhing, their patterns forming eyes that watched her, judged her. She understood now. The shard was a fragment of a Citan, a star god imprisoned in this hybrid ruin, its prison crafted by ancient hands, Necron, Eldar, or both, to contain its endless appetite. But the prison was failing, and Alara's presence, her ambition, had stirred it awake. The shimmer in the shadows solidified, a humanoid figure of liquid metal, its surface rippling with her crew's faces, their mouths moving in silent agony. It moved closer, its form shifting, Lycia, Torin, her mother, each face a mirror of her failures. Her thoughts fractured, blending with alien memories. A war in the heavens, stars devoured, civilizations ground to dust. The shard's consciousness seeped into her, cold and eternal, offering godhood in exchange for herself. "You are nothing without me," it whispered, and Alara felt her identity slipping, her name fading like a half-forgotten dream. She clawed at her augmetic eye, trying to rip it free, to stop the visions. But her fingers were numb, her skin hardening, crystallizing under the shard's influence. The spores in her lungs pulsed, syncing with the shard's rhythm, and she tasted not blood, but starlight, her body becoming a vessel for the entity's will. Yet a spark of defiance flickered. Her mother's voice, not the shard's mockery, but the real memory, soft and fierce. Varns fight Alara, even when it's hopeless. She'd ignored that strength, chasing relics to escape her family's shadow. But now it was all she had. She forced herself to her knees, crawling toward the dais, her hand brushing the last pistol. The shard's light flared, and the metal figure lunged, its touch burning through her void suit, searing her flesh with visions of her dynasty's fall, her ship, her name, her legacy, all consumed by the void. The whispers screamed, demanding her surrender, but Alara gripped the pistol, her mother's warning a lifeline. She aimed at the shard, her hand shaking, knowing the shot was futile, but refusing to kneel. The figure loomed, its face now hers, a perfect reflection of her fear and ambition, its eyes voids that promised oblivion. The shard's song was deafening, her thoughts dissolving. But Alara held on to one truth. She was a Varn, and she would fight, even as the abyss claimed her. The crystalline shard's violet light throbbed like a wound in reality, its pulse syncing with Captain Alara Varn's faltering heartbeat. The Citan shard's whispers were a psychic maelstrom, shredding her mind, blending her memories with its ancient hunger. Her body was a battlefield, spores crystallizing her lungs, black veins spreading beneath her hardening skin, her augmetic eye sparking with visions of her family's betrayals. The liquid metal figure loomed before her, its surface rippling with the faces of her crew, her siblings, her mother, each mouth twisting in silent screams. The chamber's Necron Eldar glyphs glowed, their patterns writhing, forming a cage of light that trapped Alara in the shard's gaze. Her last pistol trembled in her hand, its barrel aimed at the shard, but her strength was fading, her will eroding under the weight of the entity's promise. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, cold and vast, speaking in her mother's tone, but laced with cosmic malice. Embrace me, Alara, and I will make you a god. Your dynasty will rule the stars, your betrayals forgotten. The shard's light softened, bathing her in warmth, showing her visions of the Varn crest blazing across a reborn empire, her siblings bowing before her, the Imperium kneeling. But the visions twisted. Lycia's face became a void. Torin's eyes bled starlight, and her mother's smile revealed teeth of liquid metal. Alara's augmetic eye burned, projecting her childhood. Her mother, bartering with Eldar corsairs, warning, Xenos relics lie, child. They feed on what you love. The memory was a knife, cutting through the shard's allure, reminding her of the price of ambition. Her body betrayed her further, her fingers stiffening, crystallizing into facets that reflected the shard's light. She tasted starlight in her throat, her blood turning to ichor, her thoughts slipping into the shard's abyss. The metal figure stepped closer, its form now a mirror of Alara, its void eyes reflecting her fear and greed. You are nothing without me, it whispered, and the shard's visions intensified. Her crew's deaths, their bodies consumed to feed its hunger, her dynasty's fall, her name erased from Imperial records. Yet the promise remained, power, immortality, a chance to rewrite her legacy. The shard knew her deepest desire, to be more than her family's shadow, to be a Varn who mattered. Alara's knees buckled, her last pistol clattering to the ichor-slick floor. The chamber shook, the glyphs flaring, and she felt the shard's consciousness invade her, its its memories of devoured stars and shattered worlds merging with her own. She saw the ruin's purpose, a prison built by Necron and Eldar to contain this Citan fragment. Its hunger too vast even for their war. But the prison was crumbling, and Alara's ambition had awakened it. The metal figure's touch burned her arm, crystallizing her flesh, and she screamed, the sound swallowed by the shard's song. Her mother's warning echoed again, fierce and clear. Varn's fight, Alara, even when it's hopeless. She clawed at the dais, dragging herself upright, her augmetic eyes sparking as it recorded the glyph's patterns. The shard's bargain was a lie, a lure to consume her mind. But its power was real. If she could harness it, even for a moment, she could warn her dynasty, save the Varn name from oblivion. Her hand hovered over the shard, its light promising godhood, but her mother's voice anchored her. She tore her augmetic eye free, the pain grounding her, blood streaming down her face. The metal figure lunged, its hands sinking into her chest, but Alara roared, "I am Varn," and slammed her fist into the shard, cracking its surface. The chamber screamed, the glyphs dimming, but the shard's light flared, pulling her deeper into its bargain, her soul teetering on the edge of surrender. The chamber convulsed as the crystalline shard's cracked surface bled violet light, its fractured glow searing Captain Alara Varn's soul. The Citan shard's psychic assault was unrelenting, a vortex of whispers that clawed at her mind, devouring her memories, her identity, her will. Her body was no longer her own. Crystallized flesh spread across her arms, her lungs burned with starlight, and her blood pulsed with the shard's ichor, syncing with its alien rhythm. The liquid metal figure, now a grotesque mirror of Alara, loomed over her, its void eyes swallowing her reflection, its hands buried in her chest, pulling her essence into the abyss. The Necron Eldar glyphs on the walls screamed, their light dimming, then flaring, as the shard fought to claim her. Yet, amid the chaos, her mother's voice anchored her. Varn's fight, Alara, even when it's hopeless. Alara's augmetic eye was gone, torn out in her defiance, blood streaming down her face, the pain a lifeline to her humanity. The shard's bargain, godhood, a reborn dynasty, hung before her, its visions of power intoxicating. But she saw the lie now. It would consume her, leaving nothing but an echo in its eternal hunger. The chamber's floor cracked, ichor pooling like a mirror, reflecting her crew's faces. Prin, Kale, all lost to the shard's appetite. Her family's voices joined them. Lycia, Torin, her mother, accusing, pleading. But Alara clung to her mother's warning. Xenos relics feed on what you love. She loved the Varn name, flawed and bloody as it was, and she would not let it be erased. With a roar, she wrenched free of the metal figure's grasp, her crystallized arm shattering under the strain, pain grounding her. The shard's whispers screamed, a cacophony of rage. But Alara staggered to the dais, her last pistol lost, her strength fading. She reached into her tattered void suit, pulling a plasma grenade, its casing etched with the Varn crest. The shard's light flared, the metal figure lunging, its form shifting into her mother, her face a void of starlight. "You are mine," it hissed, but Alara spat blood, her voice raw. "I am Varn, and you get nothing." She armed the grenade, hurling it at the shard's core, the chamber erupting in a blinding flash. The explosion tore through the ruin, the shard shattering into fragments that screamed with psychic fury, their light imploding. The glyphs flickered out, the metal figure dissolving into a pool of liquid starlight, its faces fading. Alara collapsed, her body crumbling, half crystallized, her mind fracturing as the shard's remnants clawed at her soul. She crawled to her data slate, cracked but glowing, and activated its vox, recording a final log. "This is Captain Alara Varn. Tenebris VI, Citan shard. It feeds on minds. Destroy this world. Her voice broke, dissolving into incoherent screams as the shard's echoes consumed her thoughts, her name slipping away. The ruin collapsed, fungal tendrils reclaiming the stone, the shard's fragments scattered but not destroyed, their faint pulse a promise of future hunger. Ilara's data slate, buried in the rubble, transmitted her warning to the void, a beacon for her dynasty, if any remained to hear it. The Varn name endured, carved in defiance, but at a cost no relic could repay. Note: inspired by rogue trader logs of the Ghoul's stars, warning of a Xenos entity that devours consciousness.